Stop asking why. Let the meaning arrive on its own. Carl Jung. Carl Jung observed that the mind which keeps demanding why a thing happened is often the very mind least able to notice the meaning already arriving. There is a fragment from Heraclitus that Carl Jung returned to again and again across his writing. Character is fate, from the surviving fragments numbered 119, and Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The fragment does not say your history is fate. It does not say your wounds or your luck are fate. It says your character, the shape of what you already are, is fate. And if that is true, then the hunting for why becomes almost beside the point, because the disposition inside you is already drawing the outer event toward itself, long before your reasoning mind shows up asking for an explanation, and something in that thought lands with a quiet ache, because it means the meaning was never missing from your life. It was arriving the whole time, only your questions were standing in the doorway blocking the light. And this is not a small correction. It reorganizes the whole way you have been taught to relate to your own experience, because most of us were trained from very early on to believe that understanding comes before peace, that you must first know why before you are allowed to rest, and Jung's whole life of watching the psyche suggested almost the opposite, that peace is often what allows understanding to finally arrive, quietly, on its own terms, unforced. So let me offer you something to carry into the rest of this, quietly, just to yourself. I stop treating meaning as a debt that the world owes my explanations. I let the coincidence, the dream, the chance meeting, speak before I interrogate it, and I trust that what matters will show its own face without my forcing. Say it with me. I stop treating meaning as a debt that the world owes my explanations. I let the coincidence, the dream, the chance meeting, speak before I interrogate it, and I trust that what matters will show its own face without my forcing. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I stop treating meaning as a debt that the world owes my explanations. I let the coincidence, the dream, the chance meeting, speak before I interrogate it, and I trust that what matters will show its own face without my forcing. I make the unconscious conscious. If something in you just went quiet while you heard that, type the two words, "face it," down in the comments, and let that be your seal for today. And if you would like tomorrow's teaching to find you as well, in this same quiet way, consider subscribing, so it can. The first key is, the question why builds a wall exactly where meaning wants to walk through. Think about what asking why actually does inside you. It sends the mind backward, hunting for a cause, a mechanism, a chain of dominoes that explains the event and dissolves its strangeness. And Jung noticed something almost embarrassing about this habit. The more fiercely the causal mind works, the more thoroughly it explains the coincidence away, and the less room is left for the thing to mean anything at all. You have done this. Imagine you dream of an old friend you have not thought of in years, and the very next morning she calls you, out of nowhere, and your first reaction is not wonder, it is investigation. You start reasoning, well, I must have seen her name somewhere, some small cue must have triggered the dream, and within minutes, you have successfully explained the moment into nothing. The ache of it, the strangeness of it, has been filed away and forgotten. And picture the why question as a bricklayer standing exactly at the threshold where meaning is trying to enter, laying explanation on top of explanation, mortar of reason after mortar of reason, until the doorway is sealed so completely that even you forget a door was ever there. This is not a rare failure. It happens on ordinary Tuesdays. Imagine you are passed over for a promotion you quietly expected, and the whole evening goes to reconstructing the causal chain, the politics of the office, the timing of the announcement, the manager who never liked you, and by midnight you have built an airtight case. And somewhere underneath all that careful bricklaying sits the actual message, which was never about the politics at all. It was about the restlessness you have been feeling in that job for a year. A restlessness the missed promotion was finally loud enough to make you notice, but you never heard it, because you were too busy explaining the wall instead of asking what stood behind it. And Jung would say you were not being rational there. You were being afraid. Afraid of a category of experience your causal training has no room for. The acausal, the meaningful coincidence, the joining of an inner state and an outer event by significance rather than by mechanism. And here is the negation worth sitting with. It is not that asking why is foolish, it is that why is the wrong tool for this particular door. Why unlocks machines. It does not unlock meaning. Meaning opens only to attention, to a kind of patient not knowing that lets the moment stay strange long enough to speak. And the strange thing is, the less you demand of a moment, the more of itself it tends to offer. The more you interrogate it, the faster it closes its hand. Notice too how this bricklaying spreads beyond the big events, into the small ones. The odd dream you have 3 nights running, the song that keeps finding you on the radio, the stranger's sentence that lodges somewhere you cannot name. Each one arrives carrying a small charge, and each one can be explained away in under a minute if you are quick enough with your causal reflexes. And most of us are very quick. We have had a lifetime of practice. So this week, when something lands with a small shock of recognition, try the strange discipline of leaving it unexplained for 1 full day before you let your reasoning mind anywhere near it, and see what it feels like to let a door stay open that long. My decree for this key is, I let the door stand open before I ask what is behind it. The second key is, some events are not connected by cause, they are connected by meaning. And Jung had a name for this, synchronicity, which he defined with unusual care, an acausal connecting principle, a meaningful coincidence between an inner psychic state and an outer event that shares no causal link at all. No mechanism ties them, and yet they arrive together, carrying the same significance. And Jung was careful, almost fussy, about how rarely this actually applies. He was not talking about every parking space, every song on the radio, every number that repeats on a clock. He was talking about the rare moment when the inner and the outer rhyme so precisely that the coincidence feels less like chance and more like a comment. In one of his later letters, written near the end of his life, he described walking with a difficult decision pressing on him, and a fox crossed his path at the exact moment the decision resolved itself in his mind. He did not build a doctrine on it. He simply noted it, the way you might note a fox crossing your path, and let it stand as it was, without inflating it into a sign to be obeyed. This is the negation to hold. It is not that the universe is sending you messages through symbols and omens. It is that your own psyche, at moments of real tension, can find itself mirrored in the outer world, without either one causing the other. And the difference between superstition and synchronicity is exactly this. Superstition demands the sign, chases it, manufactures it out of thin coincidence. Synchronicity simply notices when it happens, unwilled, uninvited, rare, and lets it be rare. Think about how differently these two postures live inside a single day. The superstitious posture wakes already scanning, already hungry, turning the whole morning into a search for confirmation, while the synchronistic posture simply moves through the hours attentive but not grasping. And when the rare true rhyme does occur, it does not need to be announced with excitement. It simply settles, quietly, like a stone dropped into still water. So ask yourself honestly, when was the last time something outside you rhymed? Precisely, with something you were carrying inside. Not 100 small coincidences you went looking for, but one, real, unforced, and if you cannot think of one right away, that itself is worth noticing without alarm, because these moments are rare by nature, and their rarity is exactly what gives them their weight. A thing that happened every day would carry no charge at all. My decree for this key is, I notice the rhyme, I do not manufacture it. The third key is, meaning tends to arrive exactly at the point where reason has exhausted itself. And Jung's most famous account of this involves a patient, a highly educated and thoroughly rational woman, whose treatment had stalled. She understood everything intellectually. She could explain her own psychology with impressive precision. And precisely because of that, nothing was moving. Session after session she analyzed herself flawlessly and changed not at all. Because insight without opening is just a more elegant kind of wall. One session she was describing a dream from the night before, a dream of being given a golden scarab, a piece of jewelry shaped like the sacred beetle of Egyptian myth. And as she spoke, Jung heard a faint tapping at the window behind him. He turned, opened it, and a real beetle flew into the room. A scarabide beetle, a species not common in that climate, drawn by nothing he could later explain except the ordinary curiosity of an insect toward an open window. He caught it in his hand, turned back to her, and said, "Here is your scarab," and something in her broke open, not because the beetle proved a doctrine, but because her rigid, closed, over-rational structure had just been handed something it could not file away, could not causally explain into silence. And in that small crack, the treatment began to move again. Jung wrote about this in his essay on synchronicity, describing how such moments seem to compensate a psychic state, arriving when the inner situation has become too rigid, too one-sided, too shut against its own depth. Now hold that story next to a smaller one. Imagine a man who has spent 3 months refusing to make a decision about a friendship that has quietly gone hollow. He keeps rehearsing the arguments on both sides. He keeps demanding of himself, "Why do I feel this way? Why can I not just decide?" And the more he demands, the more airtight and dead his thinking becomes. Then one ordinary evening, tired of his own circling, he opens a box of old letters looking for something else entirely, and finds a note this very friend wrote him years ago, ending with the line, "Some things are worth releasing before they rot." He had forgotten it completely. He did not go looking for it. He was not hunting for a sign. And yet there it is, in his own hand, answering the exact question his reasoning could not close. This is the same shape as the scarab. Not magic, not proof of anything beyond himself, simply the outer world handing back, at the precise moment of exhaustion, what the inner world had been straining toward for months. And here the negation is worth stating plainly. It is not that the beetle was magic, and it is not that the old letter was fate. It is that a fortress of explanation had finally met something explanation could not absorb, and that meeting, not the insect, not the letter, but the meeting itself, was the medicine. This is what Jung meant by constellated. The inner situation had built up so much pressure, so much unlived movement, that it was primed, ready, for the outer world to answer it. The pressure comes first, always. The answer only lands because something inside had already been straining toward the door. And this is why the same event can pass 100 people by unnoticed and land on the 101st like a thunderclap. It is not more meaningful for them, they are simply more ready. Think of it almost like a lock and a key that were shaped separately, by entirely different histories, and never once touched. Yet when the moment finally comes and the key happens to fit the lock, no one asks how the metal knew, they simply feel the click, and something in the room changes because of it. And this is closer to what Jung meant than any talk of magic ever could be. The click, not the mechanism, the click. So here is a small practice worth trying this week. When you feel yourself locked in over explanation, gripping a problem so tightly that no air moves through it, notice that this gripping is itself the condition synchronicity tends to interrupt, not because you deserve rescue, but because a psyche pressed to its edge sometimes finds its edge answered from outside. You will not schedule the beetle, and you will not schedule the letter in the box, but you can loosen the grip that keeps you from noticing them when they come. My decree for this key is, I stop gripping long enough for the beetle to find the window. The fourth key is, you cannot summon meaning by wanting it hard enough, and this is the part of the teaching that disappoints people the most, because if meaning could be produced on command, this would be a much easier subject to teach. But Jung was almost stern about this. Synchronicity is unwillable. You cannot schedule it, cannot manufacture it, through ritual or repetition or intense desire. The moment you start chasing the sign, watching the clock for the same 3 digits, hunting the license plate that matches your birthday, you have left the territory Jung was describing and entered something else entirely, a kind of anxious pattern hunting that has nothing to do with the psyche's actual depth. Imagine a woman waiting on news about a job she desperately wants, and somewhere in the waiting she reads that meaningful coincidence sometimes arrives at moments of real tension, so she begins watching for it. She notices the clock reads 11:11 and decides it is a sign the offer is coming. She notices a bird land on her windowsill and decides it is a sign as well. She counts the letters in the company's name against her birthday, and for 3 days she is not living her life at all. She is combing every ordinary object for meaning it was never carrying. And when the job falls through anyway, she feels not only the disappointment, but a strange betrayal, as though the signs lied to her. But the signs never spoke. She manufactured every one of them out of her own hunger. And the hunger, not the birds, not the clock, was the whole event. So the negation worth holding is, it is not that you should watch for signs, it is that you should tend the inner soil so carefully that when something real does arrive, you are not too busy explaining or too busy chasing to notice it. Watching for signs is grasping dressed up as devotion, and grasping always narrows what it touches. It turns the whole world into a mirror that only reflects your wanting back at you. Tending the soil is different. It asks nothing of the world on any particular afternoon. It simply keeps the ground turned and ready. This is a posture, not a technique, an open hand rather than a grasping one. And it asks something uncomfortable of you. It asks you to give up the fantasy of control over meaning, to admit that some of the most significant moments of your life will simply arrive, on their own schedule, indifferent to your asking, indifferent even to how badly you need them. And once you stop mistaking every ordinary coincidence for a message, you become far more able to recognize the rare one that actually is. And there is a quiet mercy in this too, because the moment you stop demanding signs on command, the small ordinary pleasures of your actual days begin to return. The coffee tastes like coffee again. The walk is a walk again. And not every bird on the windowsill has to mean something in order for the morning to be worth living. My decree for this key is, I keep my hand open. I do not close it around the sign. Breathe with me for a moment before we go on. If this way of listening for meaning is doing something in you, subscribing helps tomorrow's teaching find you the same quiet way, and I would be glad for that. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it turns the lens back onto you, because everything up to now has described the mechanism from a comfortable distance, other people's fortresses, other people's beetles, but now I want to ask what your own why habit is actually protecting, and I want to take this slowly, because the deeper you go into this key, the more it stops being a teaching about coincidence at all, and starts being a teaching about what you have been unwilling to feel. First, consider what the demand for why usually shows up defending. In my experience of this teaching, and in Jung's case histories, the loudest why questions arrive not in ordinary moments, but in the hardest ones. The diagnosis, the sudden ending, the failure that came out of nowhere. Why did this happen to me? Why now? Why this way? And the demand feels like a search for truth, but look closer, and it is often a search for control. If I can find the cause, I can find the fault, and if I can find the fault, I can believe I could have prevented it. And this is a bargain the ego strikes with itself constantly. Better a story that blames me than a universe that simply is not organized around my explanations. Jung called meaninglessness a genuine form of suffering, but he distinguished it sharply from what he called legitimate suffering, the pain that belongs to a real loss, a real limit, a real cost of being alive. When you demand why of legitimate suffering, you are not healing it, you are converting it into a puzzle, hoping that solving the puzzle will remove the pain, and it will not. Because the pain was never a puzzle, it was a weight, and weights are carried, not solved. Notice how much energy goes into the puzzle version of grief. The endless replaying of the last conversation, the endless what if, as though enough replaying could reach backward and rewrite the day itself. And notice how little that replaying actually relieves. It only tires you in a new place, the mind spinning in the same groove, until the groove is worn smooth, and still nothing has moved. And if you are honest with yourself for a moment, you can probably name a groove of your own right now, a question you have asked yourself so many times that the asking itself has become a kind of home you no longer know how to leave. And that is worth naming gently, without shame, because nearly everyone carries at least 1 second. Consider the threshold itself, the place where meaning tends to arrive. It is almost never in the well-lit, well-explained parts of your life. It arrives at the edges, near sleep, near grief, near the decision you have been avoiding, near the long walk you took because you could not sit still in the house any longer. Jung called this the numinous, a word he borrowed carefully, meaning an experience that carries its own weight of significance, sometimes wonder, sometimes dread, and he insisted, the dread belongs too. The numinous is not always comfortable. Sometimes meaning arrives as a shudder, rather than a comfort, and if you are only willing to receive meaning when it feels good, you will miss most of the real arrivals, because the psyche does not organize itself around your preference for pleasant revelations. This is why the demand for why so often misses the moment entirely. It is standing at the threshold with a flashlight, searching for a mechanism, while the actual meaning is standing quietly in the dark beside it, waiting to be noticed rather than illuminated. Think of how a flashlight actually behaves in true dark. It shows you one small circle at a time, and everything outside that circle becomes, if anything, harder to see, because your eyes have adjusted to the brightness of the beam rather than to the dark itself. This is exactly what relentless explaining does to a threshold moment. It creates one bright, narrow circle of cause and effect, and everything wider, everything stranger, everything that might actually be speaking, gets pushed into a darkness your own light has made deeper. And there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from holding that flashlight for years. The arm grows tired, the light grows thin, and still the wider dark refuses to be searched into meaning, because searching was never how it opens. Third, consider what receiving, instead of demanding, actually looks like in an ordinary week, because this cannot stay abstract. Imagine your Monday, a strange dream you brush past on your way to the shower, a passing thought about someone you have not spoken to in years, gone by the time you finish your coffee. Tuesday, an offhand comment from a stranger that lodges somewhere you cannot explain. Wednesday, you finally sit with the letter you have been avoiding, and something in its wording matches, almost exactly, a phrase from Sunday's dream. And here is the test. On the old pattern, you would spend the rest of Wednesday hunting for the mechanism, tracing back through your week to prove how the phrase got into your head before it got onto the page. On this pattern, you pause, you let the rhyme stand, you write both things down side by side in a small notebook without forcing a verdict on them. This is the two-column practice. One column for the inner state, one column for the outer event. Dated plainly, no interpretation demanded in the moment, only recorded, and you let time itself do the interpreting. Because most false coincidences fade under that kind of patience, and the rare true ones tend to deepen, tend to keep speaking months later in a way that manufactured signs never do. Pause for a moment and pick one real thing from this past week, not 100, just one. A moment that had a strange weight to it, and instead of explaining it right now, simply name it to yourself, and let it sit unexplained until tonight. And if by tonight it has faded into nothing, let it fade. That is information too. Not every strange moment is asking to be kept. Some are simply passing weather. Fourth, and this is where the fragment from the opening returns. Character is fate, not because some outer destiny has been written for you, but because the shape of your inner life, its rigidities and its openings, is already drawing certain kinds of events toward it. The rigid fortress draws the beetle that finally breaks it. The anxious grasping draws 1,000 false signs and misses the one true rhyme standing quietly beside them. The open hand, patient and unafraid of dread as well as wonder, tends to be present when the real moment arrives. This is not a promise. Jung never promised you a synchronicity on schedule, and I will not pretend to either, but it is an honest description of the conditions under which meaning tends to become visible. Not manufactured, not summoned, simply noticed by a mind that has stopped demanding an explanation loud enough to drown it out. Fifth, consider one more ordinary shape this takes. The friend who calls you every single time you are just about to call them. And every single time it happens, one of you says, "I was just about to call you," and laughs it off, and moves on to whatever the call was actually about, without ever letting the moment finish speaking. Imagine slowing that down just once. Imagine actually sitting with it for 30 seconds, instead of laughing past it. What was in you right before the phone rang? What state were you already in? What had you already, quietly, decided about that friendship? That is the question the moment was offering. Not why did the phone ring when it did, but what was already alive in me the instant before it did. The mechanism of the call is trivial. Phones ring, people think of each other. This is not mysterious. But the state you were in, the readiness, the rhyme, that is the only part worth your attention, and it is the part almost everyone laughs past on the way to the actual conversation. And if you begin, even once a week, to actually sit inside that 30 seconds, instead of rushing past it, you will start to notice how much of your inner life has been running quietly, unattended, underneath the noise of your explanations, waiting only for you to stop long enough to hear it. My decree for this key is, I stand at the threshold without a flashlight, and let the dark speak first. The sixth key is, meaning was never something you were meant to manufacture. It was something you were meant to receive. And I want to leave you with something gentler than everything we have just walked through, because this teaching can sound demanding. Stop chasing, stop grasping, stop explaining. And it is easy to hear all of that as one more task added to an already tired life. One more thing to get right. But that is not what Jung was pointing toward. He was pointing toward rest. The rest of a mind that no longer has to win every mystery in order to feel safe inside it. Think of the lantern set down on the ground rather than gripped in a fist. It still gives its light. It gives it more evenly, in fact. Because no hand is trembling around it, no arm is tired from holding it up against the dark, and this is worth slowing down on, because most of us carry the lantern the other way all week long without noticing. Imagine someone waiting on a reply from a friend who has gone quiet, checking the phone before the coffee has even finished brewing, checking it again at the red light, again at lunch, again long after the day has any real reason left to check, the lantern gripped so tightly the knuckles ache. And then one ordinary afternoon, having finally stopped checking, having set the phone face down, and simply gone on with the dishes and the walk, and the small unremarkable hours, a letter arrives instead, handwritten, unplanned, saying almost exactly what the missing reply would have said. And the temptation is to call this luck, or to call it nothing at all. But Jung would ask you to notice something quieter than either. The message did not arrive because the checking stopped. One did not cause the other, but the ease to receive it, the stillness required to actually hear it land, that only came once the gripping hand had opened. This is what it looks like to let meaning arrive on its own. You set down the demand. You keep your eyes open, and you let the ordinary texture of your days, the dream, the phone call, the beetle at the window, the fox on the path, the letter that comes instead of the reply, speak in whatever unhurried rhythm it chooses. Some weeks it will say nothing at all, and that too is allowed. Meaning is not required to perform for you daily. It is not a service you have purchased. It owes you no schedule and no explanation for its silences. And some weeks, without warning, it will rhyme so precisely with what you are carrying that you will simply have to sit down, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and let it land. Not because you finally asked the right question, but because you finally stopped asking one. And if you take nothing else from tonight, take this. The lantern was never meant to be gripped. It was only ever meant to be carried gently, low, near the ground, lighting the next few steps and no further. And that is enough. It has always been enough. My decree for this key is, I set the lantern down, and let it light what it will. Here is the whole picture. The wall was the question itself. The rhyme was never caused, it was joined. The beetle came for the fortress that could not otherwise be opened. The open hand received what the closed one only ever chased. The threshold spoke to the one who stopped shining a light into it. And the lantern set down gave more than the lantern gripped. None of these were 6 separate lessons. They were one motion, turning, the mind loosening its grip on why, so that meaning could finally do what it was always trying to do, which is arrive, in its own time, in its own shape, needing nothing from you but a little patience and an open hand. I stop treating meaning as a debt that the world owes my explanations. I let the coincidence, the dream, the chance meeting, speak before I interrogate it, and I trust that what matters will show its own face without my forcing. I make the unconscious conscious. And so the question is not whether meaning will come. It already does, again and again, quietly, on its own schedule. The only real question left is whether you will still be busy asking why when it finally arrives at your door